Is it just me, or does Simon Sinek seem to have some sort of beef with Gen Z? The leadership guru has been giving interview after interview talking about how Zoomers are the weakest generation. But do his accusations hold any merit? That's exactly what I'm going to talk about today.
The grass is always greener. You have people who are going from relationship to relationship to relationship, worse from job to job to job to job. And when I was younger, if you didn't like your job or if you didn't like your boss, the bad news was you had to stay there for a year, because if you left in anything less than a year, you would hurt your CV.
This is why Simon Sinek is so negative about Gen Z and how they can overcome this perception. One of the things that Simon always seems to talk about is Gen Z's apparent lack of commitment. According to Sinek, he's been seeing a trend where younger employees quit jobs every time they face even the littlest difficulty. Now, Simon isn't just making wild claims, there's data to back it up. According to a survey by POC, about 25% of employees worldwide are thinking about switching jobs in the coming year. Interestingly, 35% of those people belong to Gen Z, with millennials not far behind at 31%. But here's where Simon might be missing a beat: the why. Being overworked is a real issue. Companies today demand more than ever before, and often it feels like there aren't enough hours in the day to fit it all in. So if bouncing to a new opportunity means better work-life balance, or even just better mental health, can you really fault Gen Z for seeking greener pastures?
My fear is that if we flash forward 5 years, there's going to be a disproportionately high number of people who have 8 jobs in 5 years. And what's going to happen is an employer is going to look at them and be like, I can't take the risk that you're going to stick around.
But no matter what the reason is, his concerns about the possible outcomes of this quitting culture are very real. See, here's where I think Simon's concerns hold weight. If job hopping becomes the norm, companies might hesitate to hire someone they believe won't stick around. Experience is invaluable, and to gain deep insights, one must face the challenges and grow through them, not just leave when things get tough.
So, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, people hated their jobs back then too. They just went to work every day and just suffered in silence. By the time you get to the 80s and 90s, people hated their jobs, but then they'd at least start talking about it around the office, saying, this job kind of sucks a little bit, And then by the time you get sort of the 2000s, people start speaking up to their bosses, saying, I think we should make it better to work here.
According to Simon, if you look back at the 1950s and 1960s, people largely bottled up their job dissatisfaction. And he is correct. Back then, a lot of people just took what they were given without complaining. Fast forward to the 1980s and 1990s, and you start to see a shift. People began to open up amongst their peers, and by the 2000s, there's even more transparency, with employees feeling confident enough to express their concerns directly to their bosses.
It's better to work here, And now you're in this young generation, and they're just they're standing up and quitting and I love it, right? And they organize. They're much more, the previous generation would hashtag tweet my discontent as I'm sitting in my Uber on my way to brunch,
As for Gen Z, Simon notes that they're a completely different breed. They won't just voice out their unhappiness, they take action. They're prepared to stand up, resign, and advocate for better working conditions. And this isn't just about tweeting from the comfort of their home. No, they're out on the streets, organizing, rallying, and demanding change. But as Simon pointed out, there is a potential downside. This same drive and energy could lead them to quit rather than face uncomfortable conversations. So is this activism a strength or a weakness? Well, that's where context and perspective come in. For Simon, the challenge isn't about labeling an entire generation, but understanding their motivations and recognizing potential skill gaps.
Right? And it's not like I don't work on Saturdays. Well, I agree.
Simon has also pointed out issues with Gen Z and their definition of boundaries. We all have them, we all need them. They keep our work life in check, ensuring we don't turn into mindless work zombies. But according to Simon, with today's changing work landscape, the edges of these boundaries have become, well, kind of blurry. Now he's all for the no meetings after 5 p.m. mantra. Everyone deserves that downtime, but he still believes that young people need to have some sort of flexibility. because every so often, maybe there's gonna be a project that needs an extra hour. That doesn't mean every day becomes a slogfest, but for that one day, workers should have the flexibility to adjust their boundaries. And honestly, I totally get it. I'm not saying we should always work late. What I believe is, there are times when we need to weigh our options. We all need our personal time, no doubt, but sometimes pushing a bit beyond our usual limits for a day can make a huge difference in the long run.
I don't do this. As an aside, the irony is, they demand that we respect their boundaries, and yet...
Simon also pointed out a major flaw in Gen Z's whole philosophy behind boundaries during his Diary of a CEO interview. On one hand, they're absolutely hellbent about ending work by 5 p.m., but they're also willing to share personal stuff during a business meeting. It's like they want clear work boundaries, but are totally fine blending personal and professional emotions. Why is this happening? Simon says a big reason might be social media. With apps like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, there's no real divide between what's personal and what's public. This generation has put everything online: their good days, bad days, wins, and losses. So this habit of oversharing online might be trickling into their office behavior, making them more open about their feelings. But it also could be stressing them out more.
Young generation seems less capable to deal with stress than previous generations. That is true. They are good at curating, they've grown up in an Instagram, Facebook, TikTok world where I'm really good at showing you the life I want you to think that I lead. And so they're really good at presenting a confidence that they don't have. They sound like they have all the answers when they don't.
According to Simon, it's fascinating how Zoomers as a generation have perfected the art of presenting an ideal life, especially on social media. It's like, hey, I've got everything together. Look at me with my fancy drink at 3 a.m. or learning a new hobby. But behind that filter-perfect image, there's often a different story of stress, uncertainty, or just the mundaneness of everyday life. This can be especially jarring when you're from the same generation. You look at someone's story or post and wonder, why isn't my life like that? Why am I buried in work when they're seemingly having the time of their life? And sadly for many, the job becomes just about making ends meet. Ideally, every employer should make even the most basic jobs fulfilling. But that's not always the case. And when the job loses its meaning or doesn't align with what someone wants from life, we see phenomena like quietly quitting. Simon's also been vocal about the growing trend among some Gen Z workers to publicly criticize employers on platforms like LinkedIn upon facing challenges. This might be seen by older generations as a huge departure from their own approach, where internal conflicts were often dealt with behind closed doors. Now, for the Gen Zers watching this, how can you make the most of this situation? Well, communication is key. Instead of jumping ship at the first sign of trouble, consider talking with your manager. It's important to express your concerns, needs, or any challenges you're facing. By doing so, you're showing initiative, maturity, and a desire to find solutions rather than running from problems. And remember that every job, no matter how perfect it seems on paper, will have its set of challenges. By embracing these hurdles and viewing them as learning opportunities, you'll not only gain invaluable experience, but also build character. If you can't do it on your own, seek mentorship within your industry. Senior colleagues can offer insights, share their experiences, and guide you through challenging phases. If Gen Z can effectively communicate the value they bring, their digital savviness, their fresh perspectives, their inherent understanding of the global digital marketplace, they can redefine the narrative. It's about showcasing not just the work you've done, but also the unique qualities you bring to the table. And while Simon's concerns about Gen Z might have some ground to stand on, it's also important to understand that this generation has a toolkit different from any before. And when utilized correctly, they can really make a difference in the workplace. Do you agree with Simon Sinek's thoughts on Gen Z? Let me know in the comments. But that's all for today.